what I really wanted to present here, open with here today, is this concept of inner being, your inner being. And it's not a airy-fairy kind of concept. It is changing that place of beingness so that ultimately you don't get angry at yourself, you don't feel ashamed, you don't get hurt, you don't get depressed because you continue to have thoughts that are negative or that don't work or that are hateful or that are judgmental or that are depressing. You don't do any of that at all. You just go, aha, there's one more. I'm going to change that place within me. And you change that place within you by becoming aware of these 7 faces. But the 7 faces of intention have to be, I think, preceded by a concept that really was the motivation behind the writing of The Power of Intention and the production of this series. And it was from Carlos Castaneda's The Active Side of Infinity. He said the most difficult problem that all civilized people, civilized in quote, seem to have is that we are all in bodies that are going to die, but we act as if they're not. So that the concept of infinity is something that eludes us. And because we don't see our infinite nature, we get stuck on what he called the inactive side of infinity. And that shift from the inactive side of infinity, where we come to fear death, is troublesome for people because basically we don't die. Other people do. And it's okay. We expect our grandparents to die until we become a grandparent. And we're not surprised at the people that we read about who die on ferry boat accidents or in explosions or in accidents and so on. But we deny our own death because we fear it. And we fear something that doesn't exist. And this illusion keeps us from being able to make contact with these 7 faces of intention, to be really connected to intention. And of course, the purpose in connecting to intention is to be able to have the power of intention. And the power of intention is the power to be able to do all that the field of energy from which we all emanate can do. And that means it's limitless. So it's literally our ability to become limitless, to live as beings who have a firm grip on the trolley strap and are aware that they're going through this experience in complete divine order. Everything is perfect. You can't do that when you're on the inactive side of infinity. I go back to when I lived in a foster home, which was really like a mini orphanage. And I was recalling to my brother, Dave, what happened in 1947. Well, this is like almost 60 years before. Mrs. Scarf came out, and she had 2 bananas in her hand. And she gave one to me, and she gave one to my brother, Dave. And we peeled the bananas, and she had tears streaming down her face. And I looked up at her, and I said, what's wrong? And she said, Mr. Scarf died this morning. And I was just this innocent little boy, a 6, 7-year-old boy, and my brother Dave was just 16 months older than I am. And I said, well, when will he be back? And she said, never. Now, I've never forgotten this conversation. And I'm 63 years old. And I went upstairs to my bunk, and I laid there, and I ate that banana, and I tried to contemplate the concept of never, I'd like you to try that right now. Just contemplate yourself as being dead forever. Forever. I'm not talking about a million years, because we'll just sleep through it. And we'll wake up in a million years and we'll get on with it. But the idea of never is so terrifying to us because we live on the inactive side of infinity. We can't conceive of such a thing, so that when we try to think about what it would be like to be dead forever and ever and ever, and millions and billions and trillions of years go by, and you're still dead. There's a nothingness, there's an emptiness, that it's so terrifying that we think about something else immediately. I'm just going to go have an orgasm. That's it. Make up for this. I mean, this is just something we do in order to keep ourselves from having to live on this inactive side of infinity. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is what Castaneda is trying to teach, and this is what the power of intention is really about trying to teach as well, is to make the shift away from never into a place where we start to live on the active side of infinity, where we see ourselves as infinite beings, as infinite beings. When you see yourself as this infinite soul, this infinite being, then all of your fears about dying and all of your fears about being sick and all of your fears and worries and anxieties and depressions and all of that stuff, you become the observer to it. You get outside of the open parentheses before your birth, and you just look at it. And because you're able to observe it and to look at it and to laugh at it, it doesn't become an issue any longer. And because it's not an issue any longer, you're at peace with it. And when you're at peace with it, you're at one with God, because God and peace are the same. Your higher self only wants you to be at peace. And everything that you worry about and are anxious about and keep yourself from manifesting and attracting into your life is basically because you're stuck in this parentheses in eternity, thinking that this is all you are, like that thing I read to you before about this ego of yours, this tiny little, piddly little thing of an ego believes, this little tiniest little ripple on the ocean, believes that it's the ocean. And you know that who you are is greater than the ocean and greater than the sun. You know that. But all of this is encapsulated into these 4 concepts of infinity, which will help you to see infinity from a light in which you can connect to intention by stepping outside of the inactive side of infinity, just moving over to the active side. The first infinity is the infinity of time. So when we think about time, we think about what we measure by what is on our wrist, don't we? But we really know that time, as Einstein said, is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. There's only now. There's only now. What a concept. This is it. The one thing that I have learned about studying people who have crossed over, people who speak about near-death experiences and so on, is that at the moment of death, you will emerge into the oneness, so that you'll get outside of the world of time. You're headed there. We're all headed there. We all have what Castaneda calls an appointment with infinity. We all have an appointment with infinity. And you can't stop the appointment with infinity. There was a novel written about your appointment with infinity called Appointment in Samara. The legend goes that the day that you see the angel of death is the day that you will die. You will leave your body that day. And so a man was in a village years and years and years ago, and he looked over. He was only in his 20s, and he saw the angel of death smiling at him, waving at him. And he got terrified. And he was in a city, I think the city was Tashkent, I'm not sure. And he got on his horse, and he ran as fast as he could, rode and rode and rode and rode 40, 50 kilometers until he got to Samara. And he checked into the inn. It was 11 o'clock at night. He closed the doors behind him, locked them, put the curtains across the window. Finally, and he sat down in the chair, on the bed rather, and he looked over at the chair, and there was the angel of death. And he said, I can't believe it. He said, what are you doing here? I saw you this morning in Tashkent, and I ran all this way. And the angel of death said to him, if you think you're surprised, imagine mine. He said, I saw you this morning there in Tashkent. I couldn't believe you were there because I knew I had an appointment with you here tonight in Samara. And I always get, I've told that story 100 times, and I always get goosebumps when I tell that story. Like you think you can run away from it. There was a story of a guy who did they did an analysis of all of the places that a nuclear war was likely to take place. And he took a compass and he studied this meticulously and where a disaster could occur. And he made these compass circles and he made all of these circles. And he was going to live somewhere outside of the circle where the chance of a nuclear effect or any kind of a disaster hitting him would be like 1.1% or something. I mean, he had virtually no chance of a disaster. And he moved there. And they declared war on the Falkland Islands about 20 years ago. And his house was blown up and he lost part of his family. You know, he moved right into it, into the only place. I mean, the Falkland Islands, what were they doing? And there's not a person listening who doesn't know that you have an appointment in Samara. You have an appointment with infinity. All right? The question is, do I keep that appointment while I'm still alive, or do I keep that appointment after I die? I suggest that you can make this appointment with infinity now by connecting to intention, which is infinite. And time is one of those illusions. I mean, how far back can you go? We have recorded history. So we go back, 12, 13,000 years. I mean, it's a speck. We go back and we think, wow, this is really old, you know. And then you project yourself in time forward, you know, into the 25th century. You go, wow, the 25th century. It's just a second away in infinity. So there's the infinity of time. And then there's the infinity of space. And the infinity of space is just as perplexing as the infinity of time. How big do you think this universe is that we're in? I mean, do you ever just look outside at the stars that we can see and realize that those stars, the light that left those stars, left there 5,000 light years ago? I mean, how far away is 5,000 light years? Light travels at the speed of 186,000 miles per second. And we measure how far away that light is that we see out there in those most distant stars in the distance that light travels in a year. And then you say, well, okay, but I can get there eventually. You know, I'll just take a rocket and, you know. And if you got on the rocket and went there, it would take you 40,000 years to get there. But you say, okay, so it's out there. So then you say, well, then you get to that one, and you're finally on that little star that's out there, and then you look out, and there's stars that are 1,000,000 light years away from that. And there's this infinity of space, and what's at the end of the universe? Did you ever ask yourself that question? What's at the end of it? Where does this thing that we're in end? Is there a wall? And if there's a wall, how thick is it? And even more important, what's on the other side of the wall? So the infinity of space is another one of those infinities to contemplate. This is what you're in. And then there's the infinity of the microcosm. The infinity of the microcosm is like the infinity of the macrocosm. The macrocosm is looking through the telescope. And now we're looking through the microscope. And as I said earlier, whether you look through the microscope or the telescope, it's impossible to say which has the grander view. So we look into the microscope, and we look down, and we see all of that journey that I talked about when I was opening. Where did I come from? Where did I come from? And it just goes to what? Infinity. It goes to infinity. So that's the third. And then the fourth infinity to contemplate for yourself is the infinity of your interiority. Your interiority. How many thoughts can you put in a brain the size of a grapefruit? How many thoughts can go in there? You have an infinite mind that has absolutely no boundaries, no beginnings, no ends. Joseph Campbell put it this way. He said, eternity is not the hereafter. That's what we think of when we think of infinity, isn't it? This is it. If you don't get it here, you won't get it anywhere. This is your infinity. Whether you're speaking about the infinity of time or you're thinking about the infinity of space, it makes no difference. You want to move to the active side of infinity. Now, here's something that I wrote in The Power of Intention. Essentially, there are 2 points of view regarding this dilemma of your own death, which you know you're going to have to deal with. You know that you have an appointment with that infinity. The first point of view says that we are physical bodies, that we are born, we live for a while, ultimately we deteriorate, and our flesh wears out, and then we die, and we're dead forever. This first perspective, if you embrace it, either consciously or unconsciously, is terrifying from the alive viewpoint. Unless you embrace the second point of view, it's completely understandable that you fear death, or you may welcome it if you hate life. The second point of view on your own death says, very simply, that you're eternal, an infinite soul in a temporary expression of flesh. The second point of view says that only your physical body dies, that you were whole and perfect as you were created, and that your physicalness emanated from the universal mind of intention. This universal mind was and is formless. It's pure energy of love, beauty, kindness, creativity, and it can't die since there's no form involved. And when there's no form, there's no death. There's no boundaries, there's no deterioration, there's no flesh, and there's no possibility of it wasting away. 2 points of view on death. Now, here's the question I pose. Which of these 2 points of view makes you feel good? And remember what? You want to feel good. I want to feel good. Which is associated with peace and love? Which involves fear and anxiety? Obviously, the idea of your infinite self keeps you on friendly terms with infinity. So that is a mental choice that we have to make, to look at these 2 points of view and look at these 4 infinities. The infinity of time, the infinity of space, the infinity of the microcosm, and the infinity of your own interiority. And when you get to this place where you understand, not just intellectually and emotionally, but you understand it in your beingness, the place from which all of your thoughts are going to emerge, and that place is the place where you're going to reconnect to your source and have all of the powers of your source. And all of the powers of your source are absolutely unlimited. You've got to move to the active side of infinity, seeing yourself as an infinite being, noticing and observing, and everything you read about the greatest spiritual teachers who've ever walked among us talk about death in such a unique way. Emily Dickinson, one of my very favorite poets, put it this way: because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and eternity. And eternity. So that's the active side of infinity. The 7 faces of intention. If we had these magical binoculars, and we could take these binoculars and look at them, look through them rather, and focus them on this, if I could look at this thing and just make these binoculars adjust in such a way that I could actually see what this thing called intention looks like. I've told you what it feels like. It feels like I want to feel good. It just feels good. Anytime you're not feeling good, you're out of harmony with it. I've told you what it sounds like. from the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaking. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. That's what it sounds like. Now what it looks like. And the first, I think, thing that you would see is that this field of intention has a face called creativity. It is always in a state of creating and creation. Meaning that when you're not doing that yourself, you are not in harmony with the field of intention. If you're not creating, if you're living the life that someone else has designated for you, if you are not satisfied with what it is that you are producing and doing in your life, then you're not in harmony with God. You're not in harmony with Source. At any time, if this Source, which creates worlds and is responsible for everything showing up in the material world, it all comes from this invisible field, everything. Particles do not create particles. They come from the creation force of this field. And you have to be creating or creative as well in order to be able to access the power of intention. I always take each one of these 7 faces, I approached it from the perspective of its opposite. What if this Source decided not to create? What if it got tired of creating? What if it said, that's enough oxygen, no more. I've had it with oxygen. Or I'm just not going to allow any more water to flow, or I'm going to take the air away, or all of this process of creating just came to a halt. Then the universe itself would come to a halt. The same thing is true of us. I want to give an intention that goes with this. With each of these 7 faces, I'm going to take what is a chapter in the book, and I'm going to make it specific to this particular phase. One of the chapters in the second half of the book says, it is my intention to live my life on purpose. It is my intention to live my life on purpose. This is an observation that I wrote one morning. If you want to press the invisible law of creation into your service, you must think, feel, and act in ways that are creative. By shifting into a creative mode, you raise yourself to the level of the universal spirit, and you activate the power of attracting into your life all that you desire. You then have available the unlimited assistance of the power of intention. You cannot actualize your own destiny as prescribed by intention by living in a plan designed and implemented by those around you. That is such important and powerful advice, that if you are focusing on, acting upon, doing what others have designated you do, then you're not living your life on purpose. Now, purpose doesn't mean, what did I come here to do? Because that can change every single day of your life, what you do. It means that you are in harmony with this Source that purposefully is constantly in a state of creating. And there is a part of each and every one of us that has a knowing about what I'm here for. Somehow there's a part of us that knows it. I've talked before about one of the most important moments in my life was when I was getting on board ship when I was 19 years old. I joined the Navy right after high school for 4 years. And I was out in San Francisco and at Alameda, and I was boarding a ship to cross the Pacific Ocean to join up with the ship that I was assigned to for the next 2 years in Yokosuka, Japan. And as I was boarding the ship, my uncle Bill Volek, who was a school teacher in Hayward, California, junior high school, one of my heroes in my life, man who served in World War II. He was really the inspiration behind my deciding to go to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college, to even think about going to college. And also I wanted to become a teacher because he was such a great teacher, teaching in junior high schools. He just passed away recently, and I can see him right now as I'm talking. I can feel Bill right here. And Uncle Bill handed me a book to read on my way across the ocean by Leo Tolstoy. It was a collection of short stories called The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And he said, just read it on your way across. And I read it about 6 days out. I read the whole story. And Ivan Ilyich, very briefly, was a judge who lived in Moscow. And he hated his life, and he hated his wife particularly, and he hated his family, and everything about his life was just programmed by somebody else. The story is about his death. The exact opening lines I don't have in front of me, but they were something to the effect that he lived an ordinary life, and this was the cause of his death. And it's what I talked about earlier. Remember when I said about sorcerers, that they are more concerned with the numbing effects that are brought about by living at ordinary levels of consciousness, meaning that people are not living on purpose. And again, don't come and ask, I don't know what my purpose is, because it's not about whether you are giving massages or whether you are a dentist or whether you are setting up a foundation someplace. It's never about that. It's about being connected to Source. And it's about knowing that you are actualizing and living from this spiritual perspective of always giving. What is the Source always doing? It is always providing. It is always giving. It is always serving. That's all you have to know. Am I doing that or am I not? God is in a constant state of giving and creating and providing. And when you're not, you've left Source. And when you've left Source, what happens? You lose the power of the Source. You cannot intend into your life and create the desires that you want. So here is Ivan Ilyich, and finally he's at the end of the short story, which is a pretty long short story, 159 pages, I think it is. And he's lying on his deathbed, and I'm reading this at the age of 19. And Ivan looks up at his wife, who's holding his hand, this woman he has despised all of his life. And he looks into her eyes, and he says, what if my whole life has been wrong? And then he dies. And that's the end of the story. And I had such chills when I read that I took out a notebook and I wrote a note to myself that said, Dear Wayne, don't die with your music still in you. And it became one of the 10 secrets in 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace. Don't die with your music still in you. So that being in a state of creating or creation is all out essential. To express your creativity and put your own intentions into the world of the manifest, I urge you to do everything that you can to see yourself as a creative being. When you are doing what has been programmed for you. I'm not talking about careers, although that's the context we usually put it into. What is my career? And what will I be doing? I'm talking about this in the everyday things that you do all day long in your life. Like, how do you act towards those people that are out there who you interact with on a regular basis, whether they're strangers or co-workers or family or whatever? Do you see yourself as wanting for them the opportunity to be at peace and to feel joyful and to feel blissful and so on? Do you see yourself being that way toward them more than even you want it for yourself? Do you see that? Do you act that way? And you practice these little acts of creation, of being creative, of looking for the creative process in others. I've put together a little mini program here. I'm going to just share with you a few of these. The steps that I think you can practice and put into use in staying consistent with this face of intention, of being in a state of creating, meaning it is my intention to live my life on purpose, Maslow said that one of the highest functions of self-actualization is to learn to become independent of the good opinion of other people, to become independent of the good opinion of others, to not be seeking that out. And the irony is that when you are living that way, when you are not functioning on the basis of trying to get other people's approval or to win their approbation and so on, when you're not focused on that people respect you and love you even more. I was a counselor for years in high schools and universities, and I used to tell the kids who just were so consumed with wanting approval, wanting to be accepted by everyone else around them, and trying to live their life that way, that they were always upset, very depressed. They were often even suicidal because they just couldn't get the approval of their parents, or they couldn't get the approval of various important people in their lives and so on. And I used to say to them, who do you think gets the most approval? You go out into the world and you beg people to approve of you, and you find out how quickly people want to avoid you. Who wants to be around someone who's constantly looking for approval? And who are the people that you approve of the most? The people who don't really care whether you approve of them. So if you really want the approval that you're seeking, stop caring about whether you get it. It's a paradox, isn't it? If you really want to be approved of, be somebody who focuses their life on what it is that you are here for, and be that creative genius that you are. Allow that to be something that you trust inside of you. Because when you trust in yourself, you're trusting in the wisdom that created you. And when you don't trust in yourself, you're denying the wisdom that created you. And the wisdom that created you is the source of intention, is the universal source. So you deny God in order to be approved of by people who think that they are, who are really just little sunbeams and think that they're the sun. People who are little ripples on the ocean who think that they're the ocean, and you're trying to please the ripples instead of being the ocean and something even grander than that. So here's a little program for staying in a state of creativity and creation. And it's important to understand, because the second face that I'm about to talk about is the face of kindness. So the universal source is not only in a state of creating, it's always kind. So you can do this and be kind. In fact, most of the time, people won't even know that you didn't show up. And that's your objective. It's not to alienate and to get people all upset with you. It's to be in a state in which you know that now it's important for me to meditate. It's important for me to take this half hour and be quiet. It's important for me to have some alone time. It's more important for me to be with my daughter who is struggling right now and talk to her on the phone for the next hour than it is for me to be at this or to do that or whatever it might be. And to trust in that impulse within you is the creative impulse. It's the wisdom that created you. The wisdom that created you is God, is good. And whenever you are denying it, anytime you're denying it, you're creating something called resistance. You are resisting the creation process. So the first of these steps is this. First, I suggest that you affirm that in an intelligent system, that no one shows up by accident, including you. The universal mind of intention is responsible for all of creation. This source knows what it's doing, and you came from that mind, and you're infinitely connected to it. There is meaning in your existence, and you have the capacity to live from this perspective of purpose. That's the first step. Secondly, seize every opportunity that comes along, no matter how small, to give your life away in service. In service. In the smallest of ways, in occasions that occur all day long, little ways to give your life away. See, you come into this world with nothing, with no thing. You leave this world with no thing. So the only thing you can do with your life, this parentheses in eternity, is give it away. It's all you can do with your life, is give it away. If you're not giving it away, that means if you're not in service. And why do you have to be in service? Because that's what it means to be in harmony with intention. God is always giving away. The universal source, from no particles to particles. It's the Spirit that gives life. And it is always, endlessly, infinitely giving life. You want to be able to do what the field of intention does, you got to be the same way. You've got to be giving your life away. And the more of that you do, the irony is, the more that comes back to you. The third thing I would suggest is that you align your purpose with this field of intention. This is probably the most important thing you can do. I call it surrendering the little mind to the big mind. The little mind to the big mind. So the little mind is the ego, the big mind is God. Align your purpose with this field of intention. Go to source. And if you ever wonder what it is that I should do to feel creative or to live my life on purpose, all you have to do is say, how may I serve? How may I serve? How may I serve? It's a mantra. Rather than, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? Which is the mantra of the ego, you shift into that place where you begin to say, how may I serve? Fourth, ignore what everyone else tells you about your purpose. Regardless of what anyone might say to you, the truth about your feeling purposeful is that only you can know it. And if you don't feel it in that inner place where a burning desire resides, then it's not your purpose. It's not your purpose. A burning desire, that's one of the things that Napoleon Hill said, separates out people who are living from this place where, he called it thinking and growing rich. But he wasn't talking about rich in the sense of money. He was talking about living a deeper and a richer experience of life. That the people who reached this level of attracting that into their lives were people who somehow had a burning desire inside, knew that they had to act upon it, and behave that way in all moments of their life. And it's wonderful to practice this. The best way to practice it is with strangers. It's like you can give your life away to a stranger by just saying, how are you today? It's nice to see you. You look great. I love the way your hair looks. Whatever it is, just giving it away. And it's like you go out and you just make a conscious effort to do that. And all it does is it makes people feel what? Good, which is God. Makes people feel God. So you just say that my purpose is to make people feel God, make people feel good. And when you do that, the irony of making people feel good is that it makes you feel good. As Thoreau said, when you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you meet with a success unexpected in common hours. It comes to you when you're giving it away. I'd also suggest that you remember that the all-creating field of intention will work on your behalf. The universe supports life. It flows freely to all, endlessly. All of the problems we face are created by our belief that we are separate from God or separate from each other. This state of conflict creates a counterforce causing millions of people not to realize their purpose. The universe is willing to work with you on your behalf. All you have to do is act like it does. Act like your source does. And what does your source do? Constantly giving, constantly offering, constantly creating. Then I suggest that you study and replicate the lives of people who have known their purpose. I love reading books about people who have fulfilled their destiny and who live their lives on purpose. Carlos Castaneda's works. Nikos Kazantzakis' works, the story of St. Francis and Zorba the Greek, Alexander the Great, and some of the people that he wrote about. When you read and embrace those kinds of things and see that as a way of life, seeing movies about or stories about people who have so purposeful, Rosa Parks, back in Montgomery, Alabama, 1955, refusing to give up her seat. Gandhi, in 1890, being thrown off of a train because he didn't have enough melanin in his skin. Great consciousness, visionary consciousness. People who had such a knowing within. Even if you feel confused about this thing called purpose, act as if you're living the life you were intended to live. Act as if you already were living it. Invite whatever it might be that makes you feel closer to God and brings you a sense of joy into your life every day. And view all events that in your mind are obstacles as perfect opportunities for you to not only overcome, but to use as a means to test your resolve. And finally, I urge you and suggest that you meditate, that you get quiet. Japa, the meditation I spoke about in Getting in the Gap. I want to share a letter with you. Dear Dr. Dyer, my wife Michelle is pregnant by a miracle. A miracle manifests from spirit using all of your suggestions. For 5 years, Michelle and I were challenged by infertility. You name it, and we tried it. None of the expensive and sophisticated treatments worked. The doctors had given up. Our own faith was tested over and over and over with each failed treatment cycle. Our doctor managed to freeze embryos from earlier cycles of treatment. Throughout the years, over 50 embryos had been transferred to Michelle's uterus. The odds of a frozen embryo successfully initiating pregnancy, in our case, were close to zero. As you know, zero is a word not found in the spiritual vocabulary. One precious frozen embryo surviving minus 250 degrees for 6 months has taken up a new home in Michelle's womb. She is now in her second trimester. Okay, so what, you might say? I get letters like this every day. However, this letter contains proof of God. A tiny drop of protoplasm, as you have so eloquently written on many occasions, a physical mass of cells alive with the future pull of a human being, turned on in a laboratory, then turned off in a freezer. All molecular motion and biochemical processes halted, suspended, yet the essence of being was there prior to freezing. Where did the spiritual essence go while it was frozen? The cells were turned on, then turned off, but the spiritual essence had to prevail despite the physical state of the cells. The frequency of vibration of the frozen cells was low, but the vibrational frequency of its spirit must be beyond measure. The essence of the being had to reside outside of the physical plane or mass of cells. It couldn't go anywhere except to the realm of spirit, where it waited, waiting to thaw and manifest into a being it always has been. I hope you find this story as compelling as I do, as nothing less than a miracle, an example of spirit in body rather than a body with a spirit. And now for the million-dollar question. Could this one embryo survive such hostile frozen conditions and still manifest because I practiced the japa meditation? Just because I opened my mouth and said, ah, I had a knowing, no question about it. Japa meditation and surrendering to infinite patience are daily practices. During my quiet moments, I can smell this baby. Michelle will thank me for my conviction and faith during the dark times. I praise your work for guiding me. Thank you now, because nothing is impossible for me now. When I compare what I have manifested now in Michelle's womb to anything else I might desire, the process is without effort. After you truly surrender, everything you could ever want just seems to show up right on schedule. The next amazing manifestation will be to help other infertile couples realize their dreams. Somehow, I will help those who feel there is no hope. Sincerely, Matthew McQuaid. And it's all about creating and being on purpose. When you have that knowing and you're living from that level of awareness, nothing is impossible. Nothing. The second of these is what I call the face of kindness. The face of kindness. And the chapter that I am relating this to in the book is called, "It is my intention to be at peace with everyone in my life, including all of my relatives." The face of kindness. This is one of my favorite things to speak about, and I have some wonderful stories to share with you about this face of kindness. Any power which has as its inherent nature the need to create and convert energy into physical form, which is what our source is, must also be a kindly power. I deduce this from the opposite. If the all-giving power of intention had at its core the desire to be unkind or hurtful, then creation itself would be impossible. The moment unkind energy became form, the life-giving spirit would be destroyed. Instead, the power of intention has a face of kindness. It is kind energy intending what it's creating to flourish and grow, and to be happy and fulfilled. Our existence is proof to me of the kindness of intention. Therefore, choosing to be kind is a choice to have the power of intention active in your life. When you leave this face behind and have an unkind thought, you've left the field of intention, and you cannot now do what intention does, which is create, manifest, heal, all of the things that we want for ourselves in our lives, and even be at peace. Just an unkind thought, a thought of judgment. Because any thought you have of judgment, any thought that you have of judgment toward another human being, of any way, it is judgmental. It does not define the person you are judging. You call another person stupid, you call another person ignorant, you call another person distasteful, you call another person ugly, you call another person untalented, whatever it is that you call in your mind as a judgment directed toward others, just the thought does not make that person that. You do not get to define anyone or anything on the basis of your unkind judgments. It doesn't define them. It defines you as someone who needs to judge. Calling another person stupid doesn't make them stupid. Calling another person ugly doesn't make them ugly. It defines you as someone who needs to do these things, and also as someone who has left the field of intention. And when you leave the field of intention, you take on all of these things that we call struggles, difficulties, problems, concerns, and so on. So it is in making a shift into catching ourselves, again, going back to the container of our beingness. Why does an unkind thought emerge from a container that I want to have only representative of source energy? Why does an unkind thought emerge from there? Not why do I have an unkind thought, but how could it be that an unkind thought comes out of a place of kindness or out of a place of perfection? And you ask yourself that question, and rather than being in a state of shame about having an unkind thought, you go back to the place and say, I intend to be living my life at peace. I intend to be living my life in such a way that the thoughts that do emerge from this container can only be thoughts that are in harmony or in rapport with that field of energy from which I originated. It's always about going back to source or getting as close to the frequency of source energy as you possibly can get, and recognizing that any time you're not in harmony with that field of intention, you have created resistance. I want to share a story with you. It's the story of Shia, who's a little boy. In Brooklyn, New York, CHUSH, C-H-U-S-H, is a school that caters to learning disabled children. Some children remain in CHUSH for their entire school career, while others can be mainstreamed into conventional schools. At a CHUSH fundraising dinner, the father of a CHUSH child delivered a speech that would never be forgotten by all who attended. After extolling the school and its dedicated staff, he cried out, "Where is the perfection in my son Shia? Everything God does is done with perfection, but my child cannot understand things as other children do. My child cannot remember facts and figures as other children do. Where is God's perfection in my son Shia?" The audience was shocked by the question and pained by the father's anguish and stilled by the piercing query. "I believe," the father continued, "that when God brings a child like Shia into the world, the perfection that he seeks is in the way that people react to this child. Do they react with kindness, or do they react with shame and judgment?" He then told the following story about his son, Shia. One afternoon, Shia and his father walked past a park where some boys Shia knew were playing baseball. Shia asked, "Do you think they'll let me play?" Shia's father knew that his son was not at all athletic and that most boys wouldn't want him on their team. But Shia's father understood that if his son was chosen to play, it would give him a comfortable sense of belonging. Shia's father approached one of the boys in the field and asked if Shia could play. The boy looked around for guidance from his teammates, and getting none, he took matters into his own hands. "Well," he said, "we're losing by 6 runs anyway, and the game's in the 8th inning. I guess he can be on our team, and we'll try to put him up to bat in the 9th inning." Shia's father was ecstatic as Shia smiled broadly. Shia was told to put on a glove and go out and play short center field. In the bottom of the 8th inning, Shia's team scored a few runs, but was still behind by 3. In the bottom of the 9th inning, Shia's team scored again, and now with 2 outs and the bases loaded, with the potential winning run on base, Shia was scheduled to be up. Would the team actually let Shia bat at this juncture and give away their chance to win the game? Surprisingly, Shia was given the bat. And everyone knew that it was all but impossible because Shia didn't even know how to hold a bat, let alone hit with it. However, as Shia stepped up to the plate, the pitcher moved in a few steps so he could lob the ball in softly so that Shia might at least be able to make some contact with the ball. The first pitch came in, and Shia swung clumsily and missed. Then, out of the dugout, one of Shia's teammates came up, and together they held the bat and faced the pitcher, waiting for the next pitch. The pitcher then took in a few more steps closer to Shia, and they swung at the ball as they hit a ground ball to the pitcher. The pitcher picked up the soft, slow grounder and could easily have thrown the ball to the first baseman. Shia would have been out, and that would have ended the game. Instead, the pitcher took the ball and threw it on a high arc to right field, far beyond the reach of the first baseman. Everyone started yelling, "Shia! Shia, run to first! Run to first!" Never in his life had Shia run to first. He scampered down the baseline, wide-eyed and startled, and by the time he reached first base, the right fielder had the ball. He could have thrown the ball to the second baseman, who would tag out Shia, who was still running. But the right fielder understood what the pitcher's intentions, I underline, intentions were. So he threw the ball high and far over the third baseman's head. Everyone yelled, Run to second, Shia, run to second. And Shia ran towards second base as the runners ahead of him deliriously circled the bases towards home. As Shia reached second base, the opposing shortstop now ran up to him, turned him in the direction of third base, and shouted, "Run to third, Shia, run to third." As Shia rounded third, the boys from both teams ran behind him, screaming, "Shia, Shia, run home, run home." Shia ran home, stepped on home plate, and all 18 boys lifted him on their shoulders and made him the hero, as he had just hit a grand slam and won the game for his team. That day, said his father, softly, now with tears rolling down his face, those 18 boys reached their level of God's perfection. Isn't that a beautiful story? It puts you into stunned silence. And it's a true story. They reached their level of God's perfection. God's perfection is the field of kindness. When you allow yourself to be there, things happen that you could never have predicted before.